Hello and welcome to the Heritage On Air series right here on City TV and City FM. My name is Apioko, and today we're talking about dance culture in post-colonial Ghana, and specifically what it was like to see dance pop up in our nightlife at certain points in our history. For those of you who are not born in the 80s and the 90s, you didn't know what was going on, but there was a very vibrant dance culture, just as strong as music and any other art, really. And we're going to be speaking about that today. The segment, of course, is sponsored by Akosombo Textiles Limited, ATL, and Malta Guinness. My guest today, now he's a gentleman I respect so much. At a certain point in time as a student, I had the privilege to interact with him. I wasn't a student of the School of Performing Arts, but I was always there, and I learned so much from him. And he, I like to say, is a legend when it comes to dance in Ghana. Mr. Terry Bright Ofosu, he's an assistant lecturer at the Department of Dance Studies at the School of Performing Arts at the College of Humanities, precisely, University of Ghana, Legon. Hello. Can I call you Uncle Terry?
Yes, yes.
That's sometimes when people come, they don't want you to say uncle or daddy or whatever it is.
You can call me grandfather Terry. Okay.
Good to have you here. Good to have you here. So Ghana has a very rich dance culture. We know that.
Yeah.
I want us just to talk about some of the things that we don't even realize have influenced our modern dance forms, the pop forms, the Azonto, Al-Qaeda, all the things that we are doing, and we think, Charlie, we have arrived, we are there. Before then, we had our Kete, we had our Akmalogo, all those things. How have some of those things, without us even realizing it, influenced the dance culture that we've seen post-colonially and in present-day Ghana?
Okay, so let me say that dance in Ghana has come from a background where it has always lived in tandem with its musical practice or musical culture. And therefore, what we see today is hinged on what actually pertained in the 1960s and 70s. And what actually existed in the 1960s and 70s are also hinged on what pertained in the 1920s, 1930s. So I think that whilst we have our traditional musical and dance practices, we also have influences from outside, which some would say acculturation and culturation or what have you. But I think colonialism brought another type of musical practice. So we can talk about the brass band that was introduced by the legionaries who came from the West Indies. The white people brought them from West Indies to come and fight the Ashantis in the Sagrenti War and all that. And they were stationed in Cape Coast.
So the brass bands were a huge part of war culture.
Yeah. Okay, so they brought brass band. And then the missionaries also brought piano, which was not part of our culture. So they were playing these pianos in the churches, Presbyterian church, Methodist, and all that. They were playing
what we call the Orthodox churches.
Orthodox churches. So they introduced these instruments to our local practitioners, so to speak. And then they also brought what we call the orchestra bands for the colonial masters. So when our folks also got educated, they were imitating the white. In fact,
the
they were
orchestra bands, that would include what we call the orchestral strings, so the violin, the viola, the cello, the double bass, those ones.
That is what actually started the whole thing. They brought the orchestra to come and entertain them, and most of them were instrumentalists. So once the indigents learned this instrumentation, now they began to indigenize them. So they started creating bands that played orchestra, and then they started infusing the African flavor, the Ghanaian flavor into them, introducing it into the brass band, into the orchestra, into the piano, and all that. And then a new type of musical practice, ensued. So, for instance, they created what they called Ada. Ada is a kind of high life that started in the 1920s.
In modern times, we have the Adaha band.
Band, yes.
Some of
One
them
of our
pass through your
students has,
department.
yes, created what they call the Adaha band. But when Highlife started, it was called Adaha. And then the brass band also created what a street side performance called Kokumba.
Kokumba.
Okay. So, and it is the Kokumba that later was developed into what we call Bobobo and Palogo and all that. Okay. So the Adaha went ahead and then they developed the Adaha into another form of high life or another form of music which was performed within the ballroom sector.
Okay.
So they were performing this with the white people in the ballroom.
So basically when the Europeans, the
Exactly.
colonizers were here and they would have their lavish
Exactly.
balls, dinners, then the indigents would also be
They
invited
introduced
Okay.
a new type of musical practice from the Adaha.
Okay.
A new type of musical practice. And the indigents who could not participate, who stood outside to watch them through the window, said, like, this is a kind of a high life kind of practice. And then out of that, we developed what we call the High Life Band.
Okay.
So they created what they call the High Life Band for the upmarket people, the high class.
So
they call
high
it
life.
band stand.
That's why it's called high life.
Yes.
Okay.
So they called it dance bands. Okay. Dance bands. So in the 60s, there were all these kind of dance bands that were for the upmarket people. And then the indigents, like Ike, Nyame, and all those people, created what they call the guitar band for the
lower
underclass.
class.
So there was dance band and guitar band.
So the dance bands were bigger, had more instruments, more lavish.
Yes, and they were more lavish, and they were playing in the hotels, the big hotels, and the discotheques.
Okay.
Okay. And then the guitar bands were in the small bar, corner bars, and all that. And they evolved into what we call the concert party band.
Okay.
Okay. So in the 60s, this was what was going on. And in fact, before we had our independence, Kwame Nkrumah capitalized on this local guitar bands and all that to create a national identity. And then they helped him to win the elections.
So they were playing music, different parts of the country, different communities.
Yes. So when he gets to
so connecting to people through music during the campaigns and whatnot.
So when he gets to Accra, calls the Panogo band people and the Kolumashi people, and then they come with their trumpet and their drums, and then he uses them. When he gets to the Volta region, call the Bobobo
That
people.
was smart.
Yeah.
Very smart.
And then Eastern region, you call the Boswe band. These were all popular creations.
So basically, music, dance had a hand in leading us to the independence that we celebrate today.
Exactly. That is what caused Kwame Nkrumah to actually win the election, because he was able to endear himself to the underclass. You know. So then, what happened is that in the 60s, they created a new type of performance practice from the West called rock and roll. Okay, rock and roll, foxtrot, and all those things. And they came in via a popular culture called television. Okay, so then
black and white, of
black
course.
and white, of course. So we got to see them in their performances.
So who were some of the big rock and roll stars at the time that they were able to see via television?
Via television, I would say the Elvis Presleys and all those James Brown and all those people
with their swanky moves and upbeat music.
Yes. So these were popular people, and some of them actually visited Ghana in the early 60s. James Brown, for instance, they visited West Africa, you know, touring around and all that. So they brought this practice, footloose and all these kind of dances, to the Africans, and then they also picked them, all right? And so it was the coming in of the rock and roll, which started somewhere in the 50s all the way through the 60s, that influenced what we call Palogo dance. So rock and roll came with a dance called twist. That's that, yeah? So when we perform Palogo, you see the twist in there, yeah?
A lot.
So Palogo is this.
A lot.
Yeah? Is the twist that they fused with. I argue that they fused it with the pa dance, So pa ni alogole.
Alogole.
So the pa fusing with rock and roll. The pa is a kind of a 3-step dance. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. All right.
So Palogo is really a fusion of Western and
the dance aspect.
See, interesting.
Yeah. And then the rock and roll is that. So the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 mixed with the twist is what you get in this one. So it's the pa. This is the pa dance. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Palogo is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So it's the same kind of concept. But one thing that we have to understand is that it is not planned. It is an embodied thing that the people crystallize within themselves, and then it comes out.
So it's not that somebody or a group of people sat down and then decided, let's create this dance that looks
yes, you
like
can decide
pan.
you want to create a dance or a musical practice. But the dance is something that is from within. It's an emotional thing. So from within, they come out.
Then it comes out.
So once they were able to create all those dances, there came 2 groups. Those people who wanted to emulate the white man or the colonial masters. They were the upmarket. Okay. And then those people who wanted to remain with the grassroots, who Professor Collins would call intermediates.
Okay.
They actually migrate from the rural areas and come to the urban centers.
Come and look for greener pastures.
Exactly. So they are kind of a conduit between the upmarket and then the rural.
So they are bringing a lot of the cultural dance, musical practices from the rural areas to the urban centers. And then they also end up coming to imbibe some of what they're experiencing here.
Exactly. And then they create, new
something.
Practices. Fortunately or unfortunately for the Gans, their villages are situated in the capital.
Smack in the middle of the urban center.
So most of the time they actually spark off this kind of new practices or new dances. Of course, today Accra is a bit more cosmopolitan, so we have a lot of Chi people and others and all that. But at the beginning, it was predominantly Ga. That is how come today Azonto was originally called Apa.
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 Apa. And Apa for the Gans means work. Okay. So it means that it was created by the Gans.
Apa.
Indigens in it.
So that argument, we can quash it right here.
Yeah.
Azonto, or the
Started
origins
as
of it, started as Apa with the
Started
Gans.
as Apa. Yeah. And then the Hausa community are the people who gave the term Azonto. Azonto means Azontaba. Yeah, the closest you can get to. Come and let me touch you.
Okay.
Cheap, low-life woman. I can touch you at any time. So they said Azonto, that means cheap.
Cheap, low-life
woman or cheap, low-life man.
Okay. Cheap,
which means that
Azonto, cheap, low-life woman or cheap, low-life man.
So symbolically, it is trying to tell you that the Azonto dance belongs to cheap, low-life people, which is what pop dance actually is, because it belongs to the low-class people. They create it. You wouldn't see anybody from parliament or from a chief executive in any company go and say that I'm going to create a pop dance. It is the low-life people who create them. That's why they create a dance and they name it Apa.
Apa.
We need work. Apa means work in Ghana. So it's a rhetorical statement that they are making. Yes. So let me go back to this.
So I mean, we're going on a break soon, but just coming to my mind, when you think of Apa, I mean, it means work. So a lot of these people in these low class areas are looking for work. They're unemployed.
Exactly.
They want to belong to the upper classes.
Yeah.
And it just brings me back. I mean, when you think of pop culture, pop dance, it's usually that kind of thing where people are rebelling and trying to make statements through their art, their street art, to let you know that we have a situation and we want you to solve it. Speaking to the government or whoever has power and authority.
Exactly.
So a similar thing was happening with APA.
Exactly. Exactly. And so what they actually do is that they create their environment where for dance, the text is the movement.
Okay.
Okay. So it is a language, a lingua franca for those people at that level.
Okay.
Okay. It's a language that they speak. So it's their environment, their space. And so it becomes a value system for them. So he who can dance best is the person who is high class amongst them.
Okay, Uncle Terry, on that note, let's go for a quick break. You're listening to the Heritage On Air series on 97.3 City FM. And of course, watching us here on City TV. My name is Apioka. My guest is Mr. Terry Bright Ofosu. We will be right back.
Ago. Ago.
Welcome back. This is still the Heritage On Air series here on City TV and 97.3 City FM. My name is Apioko, and of course, this show is sponsored by Malta Guinness and ATL, Akosombo Textiles Limited. Now, today we're talking about dance culture in post-colonial Ghana, and my guest is the right man for the part, Mr. Terry Bright Ofosu. He's an assistant lecturer at the Department of Dance Studies, the School of Performing Arts under the College of Humanities at the University of Ghana. Now, Uncle Terry, I can't stop calling you that.
That's okay.
Can't stop calling you that. We've spoken a lot about how, and what has become very clear and what you've told us so far is the fact that really in our culture you can't separate dance from music. I mean, yes, we do dance to music a lot, but for us it's more amplified because even the way we move, the way we communicate with our dance is very much linked to what we are hearing lyrically and according to the beats as well. And we've gone through some of the 50s, we've spoken about how Nkrumah used a lot of the popular street music around the country to endear himself to the people, and that was very instrumental in him winning the independence fight and winning the elections.
Exactly.
And then we've gone through the 60s, we've spoken about Adaham music, we've spoken about how the indigents in the Gold Coast and subsequently in Ghana picked a lot from the colonial masters and imbibed that in their music and in their dance. So let's talk about the 70s. The 70s, I mean, in my opinion, and I'm sure you throw light on that, became the bedrock for the iconic 80s, where dance is concerned. So let's talk about the 70s.
Okay, so in the you use a term, and I think I also have to correct it, where we say the colonial masters. One of my lecturers in African studies said that we should say the colonial opportunist.
The colonial opportunist.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
I like it. I like it.
Yeah. So coming forward, the dance and music terrain in Ghana was disrupted in a way because Nkrumah actually embraced them. Then somewhere in '66, Nkrumah is overthrown. We go to military rule. People who took power started castigating and imprisoning Nkrumah's people. The country is polarized. Things that Nkrumah embraced were left on the side. A dance came from the US, which apparently they picked from Africa when they came to visit us. A dance from the north called Torah, where the ladies bump into each other.
So that's why they were calling the bump
Yes.
at a point.
So the US created a dance called bump, which apparently they had picked from here, and they went to create it there. And then through the boomerang effect, it was brought back to us as bump. So in the mid-70s, the main dance was called the bump. And in that process of creation of all these dances, rap music started somewhere around 1972 in the US. So people were now, the blacks were also now practicing this new thing in there. And then funk music, what they call funk music, took over in the 70s. And so whilst we're grappling with this idea of US-ness and Europeanness, we were also trying to bring the Africanness and this African personality thing So there was the struggle. Okay. So the fashion around that time was between being African and being American. Afro-American and all those. So whatever the Americans, the black Americans would do.
So like the Afro hair and wine.
Exactly.
You even have a boy. It's also parts.
Oh yeah. So, and then the what they call the bars. Yeah.
Bell bottoms. Hold my thigh and leave my leg.
Yes. Yeah. You know, we started
and the
learning all
platform
that.
Shoes
Yes.
and all that.
And then what today we call dakishi also became one of the. At that time, it was called Joromi. Okay.
That's the fabric.
Yes, the
Some
fabric.
people call it
with
Angelina. Some people call it Angelina.
Yeah. At that time, it was called Joromi. It had a design here. Nice kind of embroidery in front here. So, and it was all because of this Africanness, Afro-Americanness and all that Africans wanted to emulate. So, in that time, when the coups started, 72, and then there was another one, a Kufu's regime, and then Rawlings, like 3 different coups within that time. So the musical front was destroyed. And so a lot of the youth started traveling outside. There was high tax on musical instruments. Now, as I was talking...
What was the reason for the high taxes on the musical instrument?
I just don't know. I don't know whether they thought it was...
Was music that powerful?
Yes. I don't know whether they thought it was spending too much on frivolity or something. I don't know why. But it's on record that there was high taxes on importation of musical instruments.
This is more of like a socialist mentality that we're trying to
curb
down frivolous expenditure,
exactly.
and music was considered in that regard.
And so that practice also went on.
Because I've heard a similar thing with film, for example, where film equipment was also being highly taxed, and it affected our film industry at the time.
Exactly. So a lot of things went on in the 70s. But don't let us forget that it was within that same time that the indigents, especially the Gans, also tried to voice themselves out because they thought Accra was becoming too cosmopolitan. So the Wulome, Na Manua and his people, and all these Ga, what we call the cultural troops.
It's killing our history.
So they started creating all these musical, and these people were also playing in the nightclubs, you know, with their peculiar dressing of the Wulomo style and all that.
So right along the Afro funk, the Afro beats,
they were creating those.
They were also creating that in the same spaces.
Yeah, what I would call neo folk. Yeah,
neo folk. Okay, so folk music that has been modernized, so to speak.
But fortunately, unfortunately for them, they were being called to the high class as well as the...
Oh, Lord.
So they were crossing both. So they were performing at the ambassador hotels and all the top hotels, and as well as outdoor ceremonies, funerals.
So was it because, so of course, the people
could identify with them.
Yes, they could relate to that. But then the upper class were seeing it as a novelty, something that they wanted to identify with traditionally. And of course, we've spoken about the fact that there was a general cry for identity. And people across the divide could relate to that.
So you realize that when you listen to Wulomo, their songs, like Kunta Kinte, and you have to listen to them. Top class music, you know. And so they made hits, you know. So going into the 80s, if the ground has been between funk, Africanness, where do we go? Bandstand was on the low. Then a lot of them now started to move because bandstand was on the low. A lot of them started now moving into the churches. The charismatic churches started employing all these musicians. So in the 80s, by the 80s, a lot of them had gone into church. And mostly when we talk about music and dance practice, we forget about the charismatic churches and what they did. Okay, so that place became the training grounds for our musicians. A lot of them went to the charismatic churches. So come the 80s, a new kind of thing has come. Industrial revolution, machines were now being created to do industrial manufacturing of cars and stuff. People were going into robotics. And new dance now started resurfacing. called robots.
Robots.
What today we call animation.
Okay.
And that is when we fell into the dance patterns at that time. So then during our time, we were all now, the young ones were trying to emulate this Black Americans or African Americans, so to speak, and the titles that they did. And it was amazing. Some of the things that they were doing were like magic for us.
Yourself included.
Well, I wouldn't say I was, but people like Reggie Rockstone, Ajete Soa, were the guys who started, doing this dance practices. And it was very unique in a way. And it was also a value system. Okay.
So these are some of the break dances,
Exactly.
very intricate floor work.
And
that kind
everybody
of thing.
wanted to see it. You understand? So these open air theaters would organize dancing competitions, and people would just troop in their numbers just to see people perform the new.
So there were lots of open air theaters in Ghana at the time.
Exactly, at that time.
So this
Open
is
air
70s into the 80s.
And then discotheques. But you see, the discotheques, their rates were so high, the ordinary people could not attend. So there are Skyhawk Sounds, Samens, your own Samens,
Yeah.
Willie Chi, and all those people started creating these mobile discotheques. So they have their machines and they would travel across the nation to various spots, advertise, and people would troop in to come and watch. And they were doing this in tandem with the dancing competitions. And that is how come we all became popular around that time. And so we became popular together with the DJs. So there was this enmity between the DJs and the dancers because we're chasing the same girls. and so when the DJs were spinning, we were going after their girls.
And when you're dancing,
When we're dancing, they were
they go after.
Yes, but that's on the lighter side. But that is what actually pertained during our time. And it went on throughout the 80s and getting to the mid section around the 80s. The dancing competitions, really the national dance competition started. Somewhere around 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, they started doing the national dance competition.
So let's just wrap up with the late 80s.
Okay. So in the late 80s, the craze was dancing competition and Miss Ghana. So what they did, because the dance had so much currency, what they did to get the selection for the Miss Ghana, they combined the two. So when we are doing the dance competition, then amongst the lot that came, in fact, there were very beautiful girls who came to watch the dancing competitions. And then they'll start picking the contestants for the beauty contest from among our audiences.
Oh, so that's how it happened.
That's how it was.
Uncle Terry, we'll talk more about this in our next episode. But thank you so much. Thank you. I've been speaking to Uncle Terry. I always hate to call him that, but he says it's Mr. with a capital M. Mr. Terry Bright-Ofosu is an assistant lecturer at the Department of Dance Studies at the School of Performing Arts under the College of Humanities, my very own college at the University of Ghana. And we've been speaking about dance, the dance culture in Ghana in the post-colonial era. We've gone through the 50s, right into the 60s, 70s, some of the 80s, and we'll continue talking about the 90s and really what happened then in our next episode of the Heritage On Air series. Once again, my name is Apioko. This is 97.3 City FM and City TV, and this series is sponsored by Malta Guinness and Akosombo Textiles Limited, ATL. See you next time.
Ago.